Hey guys, welcome back. Eric Smith here, 5 Reasons Sports contributor, also co-host of Scouting the Fins, and you can find that on the 5 Reasons YouTube and also 3 Yards Per Carry podcast feed. For the past 3 years, I have been grading the Miami Dolphins offensive line on an individual play-by-play basis. I had shared my grades prior to last year, mostly on Facebook Dolphins groups, and beginning last season, I started making weekly review videos on YouTube to share the grades with explanations and also some video breakdowns. And that seems to have really helped generate some good dialogue around the Dolphins' offensive line, so we're going to continue it this year with a few changes. We are going to talk through that grading system at the beginning of this video, and then I'll share my grades after I've explained that context, and then we'll wrap it up with a shorter than usual video review towards the end. The backbone of this grading system is the raw grades. I go through every play, and there are 4 possible outcomes for each offensive lineman on the field. A 1 means the player did his assignment to a satisfactory level. This is the highest grade, and that differentiates from other grading systems because there is no bonus for a pancake or other blocks that may be considered high level. They're fun. I love to see them as a coach, but when it comes to grading, I just want consistency. So as long as you do your job, it's all the same to me in the end. A 0 would mean that you failed to do your assignment. Usually, this is more of a physical failure, but sometimes it can be a mental mistake too, right? Something like a clear, blown assignment. That probably doesn't happen quite as much as you might think. And then there is a zero point 0.5, and that's somewhere in between the 1 and the 0. So maybe you started out the block solid, but then fell off late, or you had a poor initial pass set, and then you recovered enough where you still gave up a pressure, but not a sack. So it'd be things like that. Another example of a zero point 0.5 would be a combination block where someone clearly should have come off to get a linebacker or a second level player, but can't really determine who it was. And in that case, both players would get a zero point 0.5 grade. And then there's just the blank grade. And that just means that the player did nothing worth grading on that play. And that could be a pass play where a guard gets stuck in space and doesn't touch anyone, or a tackle getting out on a screen block and the tackle, on the running back happening before the offensive lineman can engage. It's things like that. So with all of that said, the raw grade is simply the sum of those grades divided by the snaps played. And for a while, I shared those raw grades, but too many people took them and looked at them as an academic grade versus understanding that an offensive lineman's job is to be near perfect. And even a few bad snaps can drastically change that grade. An example that you'll see when we get to the grades for this week is that there's a one that had an 88% raw grade, and that would be interpreted as a B plus academic grade, when in reality it's going to be among the worst grades that we're going to share today. So I have been working to figure out a way to convert it from a 10-point scale that doesn't lose the value of those raw grades, but provides a more basic reference point. Last year's version was better, but it still resulted in a heavy lean towards the higher grades than what I was trying to reflect. So fast forward to this year, and the first thing I want to say is do not compare these to last year's grades. It's a completely different conversion, and it's not going to be a fair comparison. Second is that I realize there will be some grades, particularly on the low end, that can skew overall averages. And you can also call those outliers. Part of the calculation for the conversion this year is to remove the top and bottom 10% of grades from the calculation and try to eliminate those outliers. And then the next part is that I actually lost all of my grades from before 2024. So as we're entering 2025, the initial comparison until the database gets built back up is going to be the grades compared to what the Dolphins did in 2024. And that's all it is. Don't compare these grades to what you see, from other sources on the Eagles or the Bengals. The conversion grade that you're seeing here is just based on the Miami Dolphins. And that's because that's all that I grade. So I don't want to try to compare it to other lines. And for many of you that will be watching these videos each week, that's the only line that you watch, that closely as well, right? So I think that makes sense to use that as our comparison when we're calculating the conversion. So for this year, the idea is to create a conversion that uses the 10-point scale, but 5.00 is the average performance. So with all that in mind, when we're comparing the grades, the low end of the grading scale, when it comes to the raw grades, is 86.11%. Anything that's at that grade or lower will be considered a 0, and we're going to have some of those today. The other end is that the highest value after removing those outliers is 98.33, which would convert to a perfect grade of 10.00, even though the reality is that it's not quite perfect. We actually do have one player that was at 100% for the game, and it was a legitimate perfect game. And then the most important number when we're looking at this is 93.47. And that's because for 2024, that was the average grade for the offensive line. And that probably sounds better than what you might think, but that's what it came out for me, grading every lineman, every play. So as we look at the overall grade from Sunday, it converts to a 1.95 on this year's grading scale. And like I explained before, that's because an offensive line's job is to be near perfect. And the raw grade comes out to just under 89% is what converts to that 1.95. Now, as you look down there at the individual players, I try to list the names in the order they appear in the games. But as we go through the grades, we're going to start from the lowest and go to the highest. So as you can tell from that 1.95 overall grade, it's going to start out pretty rough. But I promise there's some upside if you stick it out through the end. All right, let's rip off the Band-Aid. So Jermaine Ifedi, Jonah Savaianaya, and Keon Smith, when he played at right guard, all came out to zeros. And as I tried to explain earlier, that doesn't mean that they didn't have a single good snap. It just means that their grade for this game came in below what the minimum grade for 2024 after removing the outliers was. And the reason that we're specifying Keon at right guard is because that's the only position he played more than 10 snaps. And that's my threshold for sharing the grade of a player. Keon had 14 snaps at right guard, and Jermaine Ifedi had 12 snaps at left tackle. Both had some really rough reps, but I do just want to point out that the context of how massive one or two plays that are not good can swing a grade when you're looking at, that low volume of snaps. Jonah, on the other hand, had 33 snaps, and his raw grade came in at 80.3%. And that's because it was, the grade was 26.5. When you add that all up, divided by 33 is 80.3. And as I looked through the play-by-play data for that, he only had 2 plays graded as zeros, and the rest of those negative ones were 0.5s. So I'm not sounding the alarm. It's just a lot of little stuff that the rookie starter in his first game action needs to improve on. And I expect a better grade from him next week and as we continue going forward. And for Ifedi, I'm not going to sit here and try to paint a picture that he had a good game, right? But another part of the context that I want you to consider is that the majority of his negative snaps were pass protections where they slid away from him, meaning that he was somewhat left on an island. He needs to do better, but it's not a huge endorsement for Borum on the other side. Even though he graded better, he had a lot more help. Ifedi is a seasoned vet. He needs to play better, but he was recently signed, and I hope he can get his feet under him a little better heading into next week. And then Keon Smith was bounced around the offensive line, which is good in the sense that the staff values his versatility, but he didn't look good in any of those spots. Moving along, Josh Preeb was with the third team at left guard and was kind of what I expected. He was fairly solid. He had a holding penalty, which was probably his worst play of the day, but it wasn't an awful holding. It was a technique issue where he just held on a little longer than what he should have. And again, when you're looking at the low number of snaps there, just getting that one play as a positive graded play could bump him up pretty far from the 1.24 that you see here. Ryan Hayes, you're going to see, is listed on here twice as both the left tackle and right tackle on the third team. And that's because he played 21 snaps at left tackle and 10 at right tackle. He's been around the facility for a while, right? And I've just never seen an NFL tackle in his game. My ceiling for his expectations is someone who sticks around the practice squad and only gets the call up if there are multiple injuries. Just the kind of guy that's familiar with the scheme. Jackson Carman here at left guard only played 13 snaps. He had one play graded as a 0 and one graded as a 0.5. So that low grade, again, is skewed by the low number of snaps. I liked Carman's upside as a guard far more than as a tackle when we brought him in last year. And that's continued through the evaluation, through the preseason here. He's not starting quality, but maybe can be a serviceable backup in the inside, which is more than what you can say about his performance as a tackle. Jalen McKenzie, 2.05 on 23 snaps. And, the issue here is that it was against third team. I know he's listed with the second team, but you had Larry Borum, and then Keon Smith was in there ahead of him. But even against those third team players, he was really protected with the play calls. Even with the protection and only playing 23 snaps, he had 2 0 graded plays out of 23, and that's not going to cut it against better talent. Larry Borum, replacing Austin Jackson, checks in with a 2.64. And as we talked about earlier with Afedi, Borum was also protected a lot by the play calls. And Jackson's going to need that same thing in the passing game when he returns. Borum did not have any 0 graded plays, but he had enough 0.5s to drop him below that 2024 average of the, where it would be 5.0. Daniel Brunskill was the second center into the game. He graded at a 2.97. And this is another one that didn't have any 0 graded plays, but multiple 0.5 graded plays. And I'm okay with that when we're talking about Brunskill and Borum as two of the likely higher guys on the depth chart that are coming off the bench. Those are guys that you want to be players that can come in and, just keep their head above water and not make the crucial mistake. And I felt like both players did that in this game. Next up, you got the newcomer in James Daniels coming in at 3.07. He only played 16 plays. 3 of them were graded as 0.5s, and that's why the grade is a little low, right, when you look at the low number of snaps. But I have 0 issues with his performance. I see the steady guard that we expected when we signed him. Next up, you got Addison West. And while West graded higher than Brunskill by a little bit, right, also needs the context that he was facing the bottom of the roster players. It was a encouraging performance from the undrafted free agent that I identified as the most likely of the UDFAs to have a shot at the 53. I don't see him there yet, especially as a center when you have Brewer, Andrew Meyer when he returns, Brunskill, and Liam Eichenberg is still likely ahead of him in terms of regular season game action, but the versatility that he's showing by being able to play center could project him as a future interior utility player on the 53, if not this year, then in the future. And then we got Ryan Hayes with a solid performance at right tackle, but it was only 10 snaps, right? So not going to get too excited about an above average performance here until we see it on a larger sample size. And then we get Braden Daniels here at a 7.25. And as you can see, that was with the third unit, and it was 23 snaps and no 0 graded plays. I've had my eyes on Braden Daniels through camp, and I'm encouraged to see him carry over those positive performances into the game. I feel like he's built a lot like James Daniels physically, and in my opinion, his performance was significantly better than Keon Smith or Jackson Carman, who ran with the twos at guard. So I'm hoping that we can see Braden Daniels play earlier in the next game to see him play against better competition and see if he can keep up this performance. And then our top two performers, we've got Patrick Paul checking in at a 7.43. And there's been a bit of holding your breath as we hope that the dominance that we've seen through training camp against his own teammates would carry over against opponents. And there was nothing in this game to signal anything different. He was impressive in both the run and the pass game with no zero graded plays. And then the player that had the perfect slate, Aaron Brewer, only played 16 snaps, but didn't even have a point 0.5 grade in any of those. Early indications are that he's going to continue the high level performance that he brought to the Dolphins in 2024. Okay, there you have the grades. And like I said, this is very different than the 2024 grading system, so don't compare it to that. If you need to have that 2024 reference, just remember that the 2024 overall grade converts to a 5.00, and that can be your comparison when looking at whether these grades are above or below that line. I'm sure there's going to be some comments on these grades, both agreeing and disagreeing. Make sure to leave them in the comments below. And in the meantime, we're going to jump over into the short film review portion of this video. For the video review here, we're just going to look at the first two drives and look at the plays inside the 10-yard line. Only going to look at the starters here. So first play here is what should be a counter. So going to get everybody blocking down on the front side. Right, so this should essentially be a combo through number 47. And then we're going to get Julian Hill coming in motion. He's going to look to kick out this defensive end. And then we should have Jonas of Ionaya ideally getting around the tight end, sealing number 44. And right, that should be the lane that we're looking at. But as we're going to see on this play, our down blocks from the linemen are pretty good, right? We've got James Daniels and Larry Borum working through up to number 47, like we talked about. You actually have Julian Hill doing an okay job on the kick out. Would like to see a little more movement there, but biggest issue on the play here is that Pharaoh Brown here on his down block, not able to get his head in front, and the result of that is that Jonah's not able to get around his block to where he should. So Jonah has to help out there. And 44 is now standing in the hole. So this is a good cut by Jalen Wright to be able to read this and cut this backside and almost get into the end zone. But when we talk about, what happened from a blocking perspective, the offensive line was okay on this one. It was your tight end that's not able to prevent the penetration there to allow the puller and the kick out man to cleanly get around there. Next play here, so the concept we're looking at is duo. So Jalen Wright here is going to be taking the ball to the right. Everybody on the offensive line is stepping to the right. So the way that the assignments work on this is if there is somebody in your backside gap, like there is there, then you take him. If there is not, like it is for Brewer, then you're going to look to double to the backside, right? For Borum here, nobody in his left side gap, so he's got this guy, right, all the way down. And as you can see, right, everybody's kind of occupied here. The combo block here can only work up to one of the linebackers, right, whether that's 44 or 47. So they're outnumbered in the box here to begin with. So I think this would be a play that typically they're going to check out of. And you can see that this combo is working to 47. Really means there's nobody left to block number 44 there. And essentially what you're trying to create here with this run is just a massive pile of humanity to, fall into the end zone. But again, you can see that, tight ends again. The offensive line does a solid job of washing everything down. You can kind of include Pharaoh Brown on that one this time, but Julian Hill is now getting beat to the inside here and allowing this guy to slant through, right? If everybody's able to create that movement, then you get 44 kind of caught up in the wash, and maybe Jalen Wright can hit the run right there. But because as he's taking the ball, he's got eyes to this edge player, right? So now he's got to try to find a hole. Um, Almost gets there. Would like to see him be able to finish, but again, right? If we're talking, this is an offensive line review video. Offensive line did their job on this one. It's the tight ends failing once again, and the running back not able to, our power back not being able to finish through. All right, so here we're going to get duo again, right? So we're going to get ball going this way, but we're going to get split flow action with Julian Hill coming across to kick out the edge player here. So going back through the assignments again, right? They're going to look to their essentially backside gap first. So Paul, even though he's way out there, is still considered in his gap. You got Jonah here. You got Patrick Paul, nobody in his gap, but he's got the guy on him. And this is where, James Daniels probably could have gone either way. It's up to the line to kind of make the call there. They decide to combo this player. And then you got Pharaoh Brown here. Nobody in his gap, already kicking out the guy out there. So he's going to climb to this linebacker. So again, you can see we've still got, basically three guys in the box in terms of second level players that are not accounted for. So your combo can only take care of one of those. Looks like they were trying to get to number 47, if I remember correctly here. All right, they shift over. You get Pharaoh Brown getting up to the next level. You can see that Carmen's eyes are back number 47. So number 36 is your linebacker that's going to be unaccounted for there. Would like to see a little more vertical movement here on duo, so this could stay to the play side. They would have known that this linebacker over here was the one that was unaccounted for. Right, would have liked to see a little more vertical movement to take number 96 into 47 and be able to stay play side there. We don't get Carmen off to number 47, so now Wright's going to bend it to the backside. But as you can see, looks like Jonah is a little indecisive off the snap of the ball here with his steps, and results in him whiffing on number 94 and ends up blocking neither of them. So, had we had number 94 blocked, maybe Wright is able to tuck it in here behind Brewer and be able to punch it into the end zone, but doesn't happen on this one. And this one, put a little bit on Carmen, even though, Carmen and Daniels, right? We always coach him that we got to take care of the first level first. They really hadn't, so I understand why he's not falling off there. Ideally, would get a better performance there, but they're doing enough at the first level that this really goes on Savaya Naya in terms of why this one didn't make it into the end zone. All right, and then fourth down play, they decide to go the opposite way with duo. So as we work our way from the opposite side, right, got somebody in your gap, somebody in your gap. We're here, working through there up to the linebacker, and we should have Pharaoh Brown and Julian Hill working through up to number 44, and then we're just trying to seal off on the inside, right? Leave the cornerback unblocked, make corners, make tackles. But what you can see, right, eyes on Pharaoh Brown here, that off the snap of the ball, as we get there. All right, so we're solid over here, right? We know that this linebacker is going to be unblocked. We got Patrick Paul and Jonas Vayanaya getting a lot of good movement there, right? Would have liked to see him fall off to 47. Maybe if it had gotten that point, that's a conversation we could have. But like to see that first level displacement from those two. But the bigger issue here is that Pharaoh Brown, as he stepped into the inside there, right? If Julian Hill is supposed to get down there and they're supposed to combo to number 44, you can see that there is nowhere for Julian Hill to fit in there. And I think that's kind of where Julian was going. You can see that he starts to go that way. I think Caesar's nowhere for him to fit up. Right now he's going to go backside. We end up with him, kind of trying to get on the block with Westbrook Akine. And I think he kind of trips over the feet there, ends up on the ground. So it's easy to blame it on Julian Hill just because he's on the ground. But I think that when you look at the way that I think this combo should have gone, I think that Pharaoh Brown's head should have been to the inside there, Julian Hill through the hip, and then you would see Pharaoh Brown fall off onto number 44. And either Akine gets the seal and we hit it through there, or Akine washes him down, and we get right one-on-one with the corner here, right? So this is the first drive. Again, ends up getting stopped in the backfield. 4 plays inside the 10 don't score, but when we go back and consider what really happened on those plays, to me, feels like the primary blame for 3 of them goes more on the tight ends, and then you have the one on Jonah that would be on the offensive line. But again, as you can see, as we're going through the assignments here, in most cases, they're outnumbered in the box here. I think that as we get into the regular season, we're not going to see them trying to run into this, super heavy box where they're outnumbered. You're going to see them shifting or audibling or moving or motioning out of it to create a better numbers game. I think this was just preseason, week 1, game 1, trying to impose their will. Didn't work out, but you're putting good stuff on tape that you can go back and see why it didn't work. All right, and as we get into the second drive here, so they're down around the 7-yard line here. And we're going to get a play action duo look where Madison's going to the right, the entire line is going to the left. So it's a play action pass, but from a pass protection standpoint, it's almost like a full slide. And this is going to be the one that pass interference in the end zone here, trying to get the ball to D. Eskridge. And on the surface, this looks like a bad loss from Savaianaya. But when you have these full slide protections, most of the time you're responsible for your play side gap, and then the guy to your backside has the backside gap here. And on this one, I think that, to me, Jonah probably expected some help to the inside from Brunskill. You see that we get Keon sliding over to that player that was lined up on the nose, but Brunskill not sliding over. So while it's easy to see this and think that Savaianaya just got his butt whipped on this play, I do think that he expected help from Brunskill there. Wilson ends up getting it out. A ball that, a pretty nice ball considering the circumstances there, that had Eskridge not been held, is probably a touchdown ball there. But definitely something going on here. I forget how I graded it. Might have been a 0.5 for both of those. Like I said, a scenario where I feel like Brunskill probably should have worked over to his left a little more and been taking that over as the player gets inside of Savaianaya. All right, so now we're down at the 1, and now we're going to get outside zone to the right. So we're going with our covered, uncovered rules. Right there, you got Tanner Connor in the backfield that's going to lead up to 44. You've got Keon with a solo block there. You can't see it, but Brewer is covered here. Savaianaya is uncovered, so they're going to work to try to combo there, and they'll be going up to 47. And then we got Patrick Paul trying to cut something off on the backside. So as we look at this from right to left, right, Hill, Borum, Connor, really like the movement they're getting there. You can see that we're opening up. Nobody starts inside the hash here on the defense, but these three blockers create that movement where there is now room inside the hash. Keon Smith at right guard here kind of gets stalemated there early, but we're looking at the way that Madison should be reading this. These are clearly all cutback reads here. And as his eyes go to Keon Smith, right, I think that Smith is doing enough to give a read for a cutback there. Madison takes it further out, but I kind of understand why he did that because we look at the combo block. It's actually Brunskill was now in here at center, not Brewer on this second drive. But you can see that Savaianaya is a little slow getting off the ball. So as Brunskill's working through, right, Brunskill's seeing that linebacker flowing over top. Jonah is late getting there, and that closes down what could have been a cutback lane in there had Jonah gotten off the ball earlier and been able to create a little bit of movement there, right? This could have been one that cuts back and hits hard up the middle there. So again, another one between Brunskill and Jonah, probably more on Jonah, but this is also a scenario. You know, we're putting a new center in here, a new quarterback. Cadence is going to be a little different. I don't know how much Savaianaya has worked with Zach Wilson since he's been with the starters the entire time, but you can see that, you know, just a little late getting off the ball there. So that would be my explanation is what happened on this one. A little bit of Keon Smith, but mostly the combo between Brunskill and Savaianaya that forced Madison to bounce us outside further than what would have been ideal. And then as I watch that one last time, oops. You know, I guess we also need to consider that Tanner Connor is not Alec Ingold out there, right? Maybe Ingold actually gets into that block and creates some movement there and gives a better one-on-one opportunity against 47, but that's neither here nor there. All right, so now we're going to get outside zone right look again. It's actually going to be a play action booting out. And similar to earlier when we had the play action with the zone, it essentially turns into just a full slide protection. Going to get Tanner Connor coming across on what should have been a easy touchdown. Offensive line wise, maybe that defender affected Wilson. Really, no reason he shouldn't be able to get that out there and get a touchdown. But if you watch Keon Smith at right guard here, everybody is stepping to the right. Keon chases to the backside. And Brunskill wasn't great there either because he's getting a little too vertical on that nose and put him in a tough spot to take over for Keon, right? But Keon gets the shoulders turned all the way backside, and that's what allows number 44 to get through and to essentially affect the throw. But pretty simple protection here. Got to stay to the play side on that. You know, should have been Brunskill falling off onto this defender that Keon has here, and Keon working to the outside, and should have been an easy pitch and catch. And then last one here, Madison's finally going to get into the end zone. So we are going to get a counter, which is what we had earlier. So Madison going to step inside and then counter back out. So on the front side, again, everybody's blocking down. Borum's trying to cut off here. And then we're going to get Connor coming across for the kickoff. And then it's going to be Keon Smith wrapping around for the lead. And on this one, I really like the way that Patrick Paul really creates some movement there. I mean, helped by the flow of the defense there. The counter action draws them that way. But everything's getting washed down to the inside. Julian Hill's working inside to number 35 because we got Tanner Connor coming across. Should be kicking out number 94. Think he gets a little bit deep there, and that's why not able to really kick him out. This should be pull left, hit with the left shoulder, get the kick out. But you can see that, or getting a little too turn, right? Getting sideways. Still hit with the left shoulder, but not really squaring that guy up. Probably could have been called for a hold there. And then you got Keon looping around, right? Looking for number 47, getting a little wide there. Would really like to see him take that a little more narrow and be able to square up that linebacker a little more. But again, this is rep type stuff where you learn the kind of movement that Patrick Paul's going to get on the front side there, and you turn that up a little earlier. Madison does a good job just burrowing through there. But this is a play that definitely was not blocked great despite it being a touchdown. Didn't have the good kick out from Connor. Didn't have a good lead by Keon, but we still end up with a touchdown in the end. All right, that's going to wrap it up for our first week's video here in the preseason. Again, we're going to do these every week. Make sure you keep tuning in, keep leaving comments below. Let me know what you think. Let me know if there's something you want to see more of or less of as we get into the season. It's going to be more player specific film reviews that we do in terms of trying to find some good and some bad snaps from each of the players. Don't like to do that in the preseason because there is so many players that play and a lot of them have a limited number of snaps. So going a little different route this week for the film review, but overall these videos are going to look fairly similar as we move forward. As always, appreciate you guys watching, and we'll talk again soon.